Hello, we are in my office, so it might sound a little bit weird. I'm gonna do my best to make it not sound weird, but this is not my typical recording place. We're here because today I'm going to be tier ranking everything that I've read since I started this channel, which is actually 15 books. And this should actually get you caught up to all of the books that I've reviewed since I started this channel, and then you can get an idea for what my feelings were on them without having to go back and watch every single review. Unless you want to. I will link the playlist for all of my reviews either up there or in the description or both. I don't know. One other thing that I want to mention is that my tier ranking is not necessarily my critical ranking of it. So for example, a 5-star book may be behind a 4-star book in terms of the tier ranking, because I'm really just tier ranking enjoyability and how I feel about it as opposed to my actual critical response to the book. So let's go ahead and get started now. So the first one that we have is The Rage of Dragons, which is the first book that I read when I started this channel and the first book that I put out a review for. And The Rage of Dragons was a really great foray into fantasy after it had been so long since I'd read fantasy. I think the previous fantasy book that I'd read had actually been Oathbringer by Brandon Sanderson, so it had been a while since I had picked up a decent fantasy book. Now, while I did really love this book and was super excited to pick up the second one, it did have some flaws that are really just the struggles of an early writer, specifically in terms of exposition, and the pacing I felt was a little bit off. So while I loved it, I gave it 4 stars. I'm gonna put this one at the very front of my A tier, right there. And then I continued reading The Burning by Evan Winter with The Fires of Vengeance, which I found greatly improved over The Rage of Dragons. I know some people feel like it's a little bit weaker, but ultimately I think that The Fires of Vengeance was a much stronger book. What's most noticeable about The Fires of Vengeance is that I believe Evan Winter took the criticisms that he had received with The Rage of Dragons to heart and made sure that The Fires of Vengeance didn't repeat some of those same mistakes. In particular, many people found Tau to be a really frustrating character, which is the intent, but you don't want it to get to the point where many of your readers put down your book because they can't stand your main character. So in order to contrast Tau a little more effectively, we do get the occasional viewpoint from other characters in the series, and I found that to be a really strong way to show just how completely unreasonable and illogical Tau is and can be. I actually gave The Fires of Vengeance 5 stars, and I'm going to put it in my S tier. And next we have the Red Rising series. This is going to be 5 books, and I'm going to try to get through these as quickly as possible. So Red Rising fans, brace yourselves if you don't already know how I feel about the first book. I absolutely hated it. The only thing that I really felt redeemed it was a couple of moments of good writing and some great action. It wasn't a 1-star book for me, although for a majority of it, I was beginning to think that it would be. There are many tropes in here that I find to be extremely outdated and totally unnecessary, and then the story itself just wasn't all that interesting. I didn't think that we got a good look at the world, and our main character's intelligence level was really confusing. There were times when he would fall for the stupidest traps, and then other times when he would succeed with a plan that probably shouldn't have succeeded. So I think that ultimately it's just tropes and incredible plot convenience that really made this book next to unbearable for me. I did not enjoy Red Rising, and I don't see myself rereading it. So Red Rising I gave 2 stars to. It was just shy of 1, and I'm going to be putting it in my E tier. And then after Red Rising, we followed up with Golden Sun, and I am glad that I continued on with this series because Golden Sun is a great improvement over Red Rising. Our characters are more compelling, we are introduced to some better characters, and on top of that, we have Darrow becoming a little more interesting to follow. Now, throughout all of this series, he has never been my favorite character, and there have been many moments when I really can't stand him, but in some ways, that's kind of the point. But there are other characters around him that I really enjoyed interacting with. In particular, Severo and Ragnar in the first trilogy I found to be absolutely fantastic. I really enjoyed them on the page. I felt they were well written and well rounded out, as opposed to some of the other characters who were a little bit one-dimensional. It also turns into less of a battle royale and into more of an epic space battle, and the story is just getting significantly more interesting. And because of that, I gave Golden Sun 4 stars, and I'm going to put it in my C tier. But then Golden Sun is followed by Morning Star, and Morning Star was not quite as good as that second book. Morning Star continued some of the bad habits that Pierce Brown had in his writing for the whole trilogy, and even made them much worse. In particular, what I really didn't like about the trilogy, and especially Morning Star, is that there are many times when Darrow is essentially an unreliable narrator, which is usually fine, but in this case it made all of his plans that succeeded feel like Deus Ex Machinas, and then you really could never trust whether or not he was actually in a dire situation, or if something was going to happen that, hadn't actually been planned for, but oh, he did plan for it, it was just cut away from when he did it. It was played up to make it look cool and make it surprising and be like this sudden plot twist, but in the end it just felt hollow and more like a Deus Ex Machina than a well thought out and crafted plan. Each time that it happens, I just got more and more exhausted with it, and so Morningstar really just didn't quite cut it for me as a book, and that's why I gave it 3 stars. It was pretty average, and I'm gonna put it in my D tier. Where's Morningstar? There it is. D tier. Now, as I've mentioned in my Organize Your TBR video, which I'll link up there, I think that it's important to break down how much you're reading of a particular genre so that you don't end up in a reading slump. Unfortunately, I did not do that with Red Rising. I dove right into the next trilogy because I'd heard that it was really great and was a staunch improvement on Pierce Brown's writing. Many people I respect who didn't enjoy the first trilogy really loved the second, so I was excited to get into it after I'd already invested all of this time in the first trilogy. And that's what I did, and I did wind up enjoying the second trilogy a lot more than the first. It almost feels like a totally different writer. The story is vastly different, we follow a wider cast of characters, we have multiple perspectives that we are reading from, and then on top of that, the issues that these books are dealing with are way more interesting to me and are a lot more original than the issues that were dealt with in the first trilogy. The first trilogy is a story that I feel has been done many times, but this second trilogy is dealing with the consequences of the first one. We're looking at the results and consequences of power vacuums and all sorts of struggles, and of your past essentially coming back to haunt you, and it was excellently done. It was fantastic. I loved Iron Gold, and I loved Dark Age even more, but I'm going to talk about Dark Age in just a second. Iron Gold I felt was really great, but still was kind of lacking in what I wanted from this sci-fi story. So I gave Iron Gold 4 stars, but I did enjoy it quite a bit, and it's going to end up in my B tier. Okay, so Dark Age. Dark Age was one of my favorite reads of the previous year. I really enjoyed this book. I felt like it was really well written. It was a great improvement not only over the previous trilogy, but over Iron Gold as well. I fell in love with some of the characters in this. There were so many shocking and heartbreaking moments in this that I just did not think were going to happen. And then when they did, I realized I should have seen this coming. Darrow should have seen this coming. These other people should have seen this coming, and I found it to be excellent. It is, in my opinion, the best sci-fi book I have read in a long time. Dark Age was amazing. And in fact, I found that it was worth reading the original trilogy that I ultimately didn't enjoy all that much just so that I could get to the story of Dark Age, because Dark Age is an amazing, amazing book. I loved it. I gave it 5 stars, and I'm going to be putting it in my A tier behind Rage of Dragons. So Jade City is sort of this magical mafia urban fantasy. I thought it was really compelling. I loved the characters in this book and found them to be well written, especially from the different perspectives that you get of each of them. You get kind of a different side of each person, which I found to be just masterful writing from Fonda Lee. I thought it was excellent, but that's really the only part of the book that I like. I didn't really enjoy the plot, and I felt like the magic system was underutilized, even though it's this huge and prominent part of the entire story. I just felt like it didn't see enough use. It's mentioned a lot. They love talking about the magic, but it's almost never used for what it can and should be used for. They train with it all the time. There's all of these training scenes and stuff like that that you see at an academy, but I just didn't get enough of it in order to satisfy what I wanted out of this urban fantasy book. I wound up giving Jade City 3 stars, even though it wasn't really for me. I definitely appreciated it and had a lot of respect for it, and I'm gonna go ahead and put that one behind Morningstar. Jade War is also gonna be pretty much the exact same story. I enjoyed it exactly as much as I enjoyed Jade City, so it's just gonna be right next to it, but Jade City and Jade War I just found didn't have enough for me. Jade War was probably a little more disappointing because the title Jade War implied I was going to get what I wanted, and then I just didn't.
Actually, there are 2 wars right now.
So both of those books I'm just going to put in the D tier behind Morningstar, and then I'm going to talk about Jade Legacy because I did love Jade Legacy. Jade City. Jade War. Now, Jade Legacy. This book made those first 2 books worth it because it was amazing. All of those character moments finally added up. There are moments of genuine heartbreak, and it's not because she's killing off characters left and right or anything along those lines. It's more just that the characters and all of the consequences of their past actions are beginning to catch up with them, and you're seeing some really heartbreaking moments from their perspectives. They are doing awful things to each other, and they have done awful things to each other they are now having to own up to, and it was just amazing. There are many just fantastic moments, and it has the perfect ending to a series that I have read in a very long time. I found it to be masterful. I was sad when it was over. I even found myself missing those characters even if I didn't really enjoy the first couple of books. It was just fantastically well done. It was an excellent ending to it. I gave it 5 stars, and I'm going to be putting it in my A tier. And then it was back to some high fantasy for me, and I stuck with John Gwynne for the next 5 books. First, I read The Faithful and the Fallen. That's Malice, Valor, Ruin, and Wrath. Now, Malice was better than Red Rising, but by a small margin, and it's only because it didn't have tropes that I find to be genuinely distasteful. It only had tropes that I simply don't enjoy for my own personal taste. Specifically Chosen One and super high stakes, but it did also have tropes that I did enjoy, like animal companions, because you will always win my heart over with that. Malice, for me, I just wasn't a huge fan of it because the pacing was really slow. I was tempted to give it about 2 stars by the time I got to the end, but then the last 50 pages or so were excellent, simply outstanding. I loved those last 50 pages and they brought the rating up just a bit. So I gave it 3 stars. I'm gonna be putting Malice in my E tier. Now, before I continue on with The Faithful and the Fallen and the last John Gwynne book that I read, I wanted to let you know that you can like, comment, and subscribe at no cost to you. It really doesn't cost anything. It's completely free. And it's cool. You get perks like being able to see a filled in like button down there instead of something that's grayed out or empty. Like me. So, next I read Valor, and Valor was a significant step up from Malice. It still wasn't quite perfect, and my main problem with Valor is really just going to be that I wasn't enjoying the story itself. I found it to be very tropey and predictable and a little bit plot convenient, but I still found the writing to be great. The characters were really strong and were getting stronger as time went on, and additionally, just his combat is fantastic. John Gwynne is a master of writing combat, especially I found big battles, although his one-on-one fights improve over the next few books that he writes. It's a solid book, it's a decent read, but it was just a little bit too tropey for me and wasn't exactly what I was looking for at the time. So I gave 4 stars to Valor. I'm gonna put it just behind Iron Gold. Valor. And next we have Ruin, which wound up being my favorite book in the series. I really enjoyed Ruin. I thought that it was excellent writing. John Gwynne finally turns some of those tropes on their head. He had a lot of moments in there that drew out laughter and tears and many other forms of emotion, and I thought that it was just excellently done. This was the peak for me of the Faithful and the Fallen series. I enjoyed it so much, and the ending was so powerful that I immediately got up and began reading Wrath because I had to know what happened next, even though it was way past my bedtime at that point and I really should have just gone to bed. So I loved Ruin, I gave it 5 stars, and I'm gonna be putting it in the A tier behind Dark Age. And now Wrath. And I found Wrath to be a little bit too neat, a little too convenient, if you will. It was just all tied up in this neat little bow as opposed to being something more of a convoluted mess that I think that it should be. For the most part, the ending wasn't all that great. It was really predictable. I just found that there wasn't enough cost associated with any victories that our heroes had in this book, which was a problem for me. Now, there was one character, my favorite character in the series, whose ending I found to be really beautiful, excellently written, and extremely emotional, and that bumped the rating up a little bit for me. So I wound up giving Wrath 4 stars, and I actually put it above Iron Gold in terms of my enjoyment. And that is going to bring us to my most recent read and most recent review, Shadow of the Gods by John Gwynne and the Bloodsworn Saga. Now, I will be reading and reviewing Hunger of the Gods, don't worry, I loved Shadow. I just haven't had the opportunity to finish reading Hunger, but as soon as I do, there will be a review out for that. However, Shadow of the Gods, absolutely fantastic. Better than anything I read in The Faithful and the Fallen, and in fact, better than anything that I have read across all of these books that I have just listed. It is my favorite read in recent memory. I found it to be exactly what I wanted and what I was hoping for and what I wanted many of the other books that I'd read to be. The characters are amazing, the world is fascinating, everything sticks with you, and you only learn what you need to learn. You're given the information that you need in order to figure out foreshadowing and things of that nature. It takes you along kind of like a gentle current. You are just flowing through this story, and I finished it extremely quickly. I loved this book and the characters in it. I couldn't even pick a favorite character in Shadow of the Gods. If you are somebody who either loves fantasy or is looking to get your feet wet with adult fantasy, I think Shadow of the Gods is probably the best next book for you to read. This was amazing, and I cannot recommend it enough to just about anybody. Read Shadow of the Gods, seriously. So with all of that praise that I gave to Shadow, I obviously gave it 5 stars, and I'm gonna be putting it at the very top of my S tier. And there you have it, my tier ranking for all of the books that I have read since I started this channel. Now you don't have to go back and watch all my reviews, although it would be cool if you did, that would help me out. Thank you very much for taking the time to check out this video, I really appreciate it. If you would like to see another video from me, you can do so by clicking up here. I will be back in front of my bookshelf next Wednesday, but until then, goodbye.